Randy Bachman, if you're American, or Bachman if you're Canadian, is 34 years old. He's been a member of the LDS Church for the last 11 years. He married Lorraine civilly in 1966, and then in the Carson Temple in June of 1968. Randy was the leader and member of the Guess Who for 10.5 years. I'm sure that many of you remember the Guess Who. He wrote and played such hits as These Eyes, Laughing, She's Come Undone, No Time, No Sugar Tonight, and American Woman. He left the Guess Who in May of 1970 with a problem of conflicting lifestyles with the rest of the group. He sold approximately 10 million worldwide records with that group. In January of 1971, Randy started Bachman Turner Overdrive with some brothers and a friend. Produced, composed, wrote, and sang such hits as Let It Ride, Hey You, Taking Care of Business, Rolling Down the Highway, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, My Wheels Won't Turn, Looking Out for Number One. Randy has just left Bachman Turner Overdrive in September of '77 to pursue a solo career. He also sold with BTO 10 million records worldwide. Randy has won 19 Juno Awards, which is the Canadian equivalent of a Grammy. He has been awarded close to 30 BMI, or Broadcast Music Incorporated, certificates of high performance. He has sold close to 60 gold and platinum records. As you know, gold represents 1 million, platinum represents 3 million sales for worldwide record sales. He did some work for the church, wrote and played the music for Taking Care, a film about Canadian Mormons. It was used to introduce non-Mormons to the church in Canada, sponsored by the LDS Church headquarters in Salt Lake. And it goes on. But without any further ado, we'd like to introduce Randy and say that he will be giving stories from his life, and then we'll open the last part of the lecture, last part of his address, to question and answers. So we'd like to turn the rest of the time over to Brother Randy Bachman.
Thank you. It's amazing for me to be here and to see all of you. I just did a little interview over at the TV station, and the first question the girl asked me is my talk, and I get asked that question everywhere I've traveled in the world by the radio and the TV people who interview me. And that's, how do you manage to be a Mormon, an active Mormon, and a member of a rock band, or at least a rock star? Now, I can't explain this to these people in one sentence, and therefore they can't put it in their interview, or it doesn't get on TV that often. It takes about 90 minutes. That's what I'm doing here. I'm going to try to crunch that down, because I understand some of you have to leave at 5 o'clock for something, for classes. I don't like people walking out of my performances, so I'll make the performance smaller. I'll start out by saying that I really grew up loving music, and I started playing violin when I was at the age of 5. And I started playing classical violin, and it was a great world opening to me, because I was a very quiet child, and I had this great release suddenly for my emotions, and I was playing scales, the first 4 or 5 years of scale on the violin, and then I got into better stuff. So I grew up with this emotional outlet and this release with music. Unfortunately, when I would misbehave, I would get sent to my room to practice my violin. And I'd look out the window and see the kids out on their bikes and playing football and going to baseball games, and I just really wanted to be normal. And I was a classical violinist, and I used to do concerts in a little tuxedo up on stage, and I was 10, 11 years old with just a piano accompanist, and I just wanted to be a normal kid. And when I got old enough to say, I want to quit, which was the age of 12, I went to my mom and dad and said, I am quitting. So I quit playing violin for those reasons. And then I became normal for a couple of years. Was terrible at baseball. Was a joke at football. Couldn't catch any fish. And all the normal things that I wanted to do were really frustrating and kind of boring. And a couple of years went by and I was 15 years of age. And I grew up, by the way, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, which is right in the dead center of Canada and almost in the center of the North American continent. TV had come to Winnipeg. And a Jewish friend of mine, who suddenly had a whole lot of friends because he had the only TV on the block, a little 12-inch black and white TV, and we'd go over there after school and watch Howdy Doody and Lone Ranger and all these things. And this brother over here on his show, Johnny Whitaker. And we'd watch all these things on TV. And one night, something made me want to get back into music. It was the Tommy Dorsey show. And this is hard for me to say. That night, I don't usually get choked up so early. That night Elvis was on. Excuse me. And I said, that's it. I want to be like him. So, I didn't even know what he was playing, by the way. He had a guitar around his neck. And I had been so classically trained that I said, what's that? I had a cousin from the farm who would come in to visit us every weekend, and he had a guitar. He'd play all Johnny Cash songs, and Hank Snow and things like that. And he said, you want to learn to play guitar? And I said, yeah. And he let me use guitar for that week. He showed me 3 chords, and he came back a week later, and I could play better than he could. He could play pretty good. And I had found out that my years of studying violin had paid off, and I developed the ear for music. And then when I hear a tune once, I never forget it. So I would listen to what was on the radio at that time. There was a lot of Elvis and Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and rock and roll was just beginning. As I hear a song once, I would know it. And all I had to do was go to the guitar and figure it out and play it. So I was on my way. I had a new love in music, and I had a new emotional release. And then I got tired of playing alone with my record player, and I began to seek out other guys who played drums and bass and things like that. And I got a bunch of high school friends together, and we started a band, and we began to play high schools and colleges and community clubs, and we got better and better and better, so we couldn't get any better. And it was time to make a record. And we went up and made a record, and the name of the band was the Guess Who. It was the first band I was in, the first band that I had been part of starting. And out of nowhere, we were in high school, grade 11, grade 12. I was in my first year college. One guy, the drummer, Gary Peterson, was in dentistry. And we had a hit record. It was called Shakin' All Over, and one of the first songs we had cut in a little 3-track studio in Minneapolis. It was the closest studio to Winnipeg. We had a hit record. It was #1 in Canada. And we didn't know you could go on the road and do concerts and make an awful lot of money. So we were in high school, and we'd get the trade magazines, and there was Record World, Billboard, and Cashbox. And they tell you where you are in the world, competing with, everybody in the world gets on these 3 magical trades. They're the Bibles of the industry. And we would sit there in high school and college and open up Billboard and say, wow, we're 23 this week with a bullet. Next week, wow, we're 18. And we just went up the charts, and then we went down the charts. And, we had a phone call, and this was all sitting in Winnipeg, playing for $50 a night, high school dances. But there was $500 and $600, $800 a night, $1,000 a night to be made in the United States. We got a call to go down and be on the Ed Sullivan Show. Well, after Tommy Dorsey show went off the other big thing was Ed Sullivan. Sunday night he had on the Beatles and Jerry and the Pacemakers, and he had everybody on, and you could really break wide open on Ed Sullivan. So I quit college, Gary Peterson quit dentistry, Jim Cale quit work, the other guy quit work, and we drove to New York, couldn't get in the Ed Sullivan Theater. They hadn't heard of us. And here it was just a shady character, a manager, who had saw us going up the charts and knew if he got us down there and get us work, he could get a percentage of our work. But we didn't like this too much and turned around. We had boarded my dad's station wagon at the time. We drove non-stop from Winnipeg to New York. Had this unfortunate experience, got back in Dad's wagon and drove non-stop back to Winnipeg. Well, we had nothing else to do except be in a band. We had quit college and school and work, and rather than go back to school a week later, and have to humble yourself before the professors and stuff, because, you know, it was kind of a big deal when I went into I'm quitting and we were going on Ed Sullivan. So we came home and wouldn't dare go back to work or school, so we were a full-time rock and roll band. And we began to tour the country to make money. And now I have grown older and I am 22, 23 years of age. And music is getting very accepted. You know, in the early stages they said rock and roll will never last, it's going to die next year. And now this is 10 years later, and I'm really doing well in a rock band. And the Beatles have come, and it's just bigger than ever. So we started to make our living playing the little armpits, we call them, of Canada. In Saskatchewan and Alberta and Ontario and all the provinces, we played every little nook and cranny we could find, just to keep going. And at this time, well, after we got back from New York, the lead singer had quit. So I found I was the leader of the Guess Who, and I needed somebody to replace him. So I went to a younger band in Winnipeg who were challenging our position as the top band in Winnipeg. And their lead singer was really something. Young, good-looking, great voice, played piano. So we made a decision to ask him to join the Guess Who. And I got to ask him because I was the leader, and his name was Burton Cummings. So I called Burton up and I said, now he's a 16-year-old punk at this time. Really, I mean, a real prototype. I asked him to join the band and he accepted. So when he joined the band, then we went on tour and toured all these other places in Canada. And we were trying to regain our composure and write original songs, and just to get better than anybody else. And at this time, this is now 1967, 1968, the term acid rock came in, and with it came acid, and a whole lot of drugs, and the whole drug scene came in, and it was suddenly very hip to want to be like the Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, Quicksilver Messenger Service, and everybody who was living this hippie kind of communal life all in one house, all buying their dope together, all writing their songs together, and suddenly music took on kind of a funny twist. Well, at the time, the Guess Who, the other guys in the Guess Who were discovering this, or not discovering, but getting acquainted with it. One of our travels, we stopped in Regina, Saskatchewan, and which is only about 300 miles from Winnipeg. So we were close to home. We were playing Regina, and we had a night off. So on a night off, we went to a coffee house where the folk singers used to play, and Joni Mitchell was playing there, and Sir Douglas Quintet. And we went to see these kids on our night off. And while we were sitting there at our table, it was me and the rest of Guess Who. And up to this point in my life, and even now, I was a very shy person. Now it's only because I've been successful that I can stand up and talk. But when you're not successful, you're really withdrawn. And I hardly talk to anybody, and I can't see far away without my glasses. And people thought I was stuck up and shy, and I really kept to myself. I was not what you call a heavy dude with the ladies or a ladies' man or anything. It was my guitar and my music and the whole thing. But this night in this folk house, watching these performers sitting at the table. Through the door walked two girls. And they did not look like they were from Regina, Saskatchewan. They looked really American, like California, or I didn't know at the time, Utah. And when these girls walked in the door, one was a blonde and the other one was brunette, dark hair. And I just got hit in the forehead with an axe. And someone said to me, "This is the girl." And everybody has a dream girl or a dream guy. That's a composite of, whoever you liked in movies or people you just liked. And you have this dream girl or this dream guy that's in your mind. And here was my dream girl. I had walked through the door, and I didn't know what to do. And something said to me, "You've got to go meet this girl or you'll be unhappy the rest of your life." And so I found myself saying to the rest of the band, "You guys wait here, I'm going to go sit with those two girls." We had all seen them come in, they would really look good. So the rest of the band sat there, and were watching me, who had never made any move like this before, go over to this table. And they thought I was going to turn around and come right back to the table. But I went to the table and I said, "May I sit down at your table?" And the blonde said, "Sure, pull up a chair." It wasn't the blonde I was interested in, but I was happy enough to sit down at the chair. So I sat at the table and carried on quite a lengthy conversation with the blonde, whose name was Laura Lee. And found out she was so active in the conversation because she was getting married in 2 weeks, and her fiancé was coming in to pick her up that night. She had nothing really to lose. Anyways, her fiancé, for some reason, he didn't come that night. Something happened and we were making their wedding plans. And finally I said to them, "Can I take you girls home later?" And I had the car keys, the group's car. And they said, "We have our own car, why don't you come home with us?" So I figured, wow, this never happened to me. So then I was able to boogie back to the table and throw the guys the car keys and say, "You guys can have the car, I'm going with them." So I left with these girls and they took me home. And now it was 11 or 11:30 at night. And I went to their home. And the mother was grinding wheat. Baking bread or something like that. And I've never seen this in my life except in bakeries. And all the brothers came down and everybody, and I couldn't quite get over the atmosphere of the house. But when I walked in that house, there was something different in that house that I had never experienced before. And I grew up with 3 brothers. And I thought I was Beaver Cleaver when I grew up. I thought I grew up in the normal, these families you see on TV. I thought I was that kind. And I thought I had everything that you could want in a family. But suddenly I was in this house and there was something in this house that as Beaver Cleaver I didn't have. And my first visit to the house, I just didn't say anything. I met everybody. And I left, and I asked if I might see the brunette, Lorraine, the next day. And she was working, so I had arranged to pick her up at work and come back to the house for dinner. And I did this for a couple of days, and finally the second or third day, we were driving along, and I said to her, "Excuse me if I'm out of line, but there's something weird about you and your family. If you can tell me what it is, I'd really like to know. And if I'm wrong, just please forgive me." She said, "Well, if there's anything different about us, it's that we're Mormons." And all I'd ever heard about Mormons was 2 things: Brigham Young with a whole lot of wives. And I figured if I can get this girl and more like her, that's fine. And I heard about a Mormon wrestler, Don Leo Jonathan, who would crush his foes. I thought that was neat. Those are the 2 things I heard about Mormons. And anyways, I left Regina and went back home to Winnipeg. But before I left, Lorraine, who's now sitting over here, said to me, "If you want to know more about the church, you can look it up in the phone book. There'll be one in Winnipeg, you can go and find out." So I went home, looked it up in the phone book, got the address, and went there the following Sunday. I came in and sat in the back pew, And my first impression was that the minister was sick. I couldn't see him. And I thought, this is really nice that everybody's helping out. I'd grown up a Lutheran, and we always had a pastor at the front with the white collar and the black outfit and everything. And church, being a Lutheran, was very formal. And suddenly I was at this meeting where all the people were taking turns, and little kids were administering the sacrament, taking it out. And it really struck me. I thought it was really, human isn't the word, but normal. I thought that's the way it should have been. Really down to earth and really people caring. And when that meeting was over, I left. You've seen it many times. Investigators making a quick exit. Well, I left, but I found that I couldn't sleep that whole week, and I found that I wanted to go back the following Sunday. And when I went back the following Sunday, I got met at the door by the branch president and missionaries. And this really knocked me for a loop, because when I went to the Lutheran church, you just kind of walked in quietly. You didn't really say hello to too many people. At the end, the minister was waiting there as you went out the door, and you shook hands with him. It was kind of just cold. And suddenly I was in this thing, and it was like a family reunion, and I didn't know anything. They were welcoming me so much that I began to like it. Being as shy as I was, I completely said, it set me back a step at first, but then I really fell into it and really liked it. And I got asked the golden question. And I accepted, and I said, look, I'm only home for a week, so I had 2 missionaries. Come tomorrow, come Monday to my home. I just got a new watch with an alarm. I forgot what it was. Oh, I had the missionaries come to my home the next day. And they set up, and in those days they had like a tripod and a felt board and little figures stuck on the felt board. And they got this all set up in my living room, and my mother kind of got a sniff of what was going on. She decided to vacuum. So she came up with this real noisy thing and began to clunk all around the legs and chairs in our living room. So I took the two missionaries, and I said, let's go into my bedroom. So we went quietly into my bedroom, and they got their whole thing set up. And now I'm 22 years of age. I've been cleaning my room since I was 10. My mother decided to vacuum my bed. She followed us in there with the vacuum, really trying to disrupt us. And finally I had to say to her, look, Mom, this is really important. I'm a big boy now, and these guys are here to help me. They're here to teach me about the Mormon church, and I think there's something really wonderful about it. And I invited her to stay. Shut off the vacuum and stay, or take the vacuum. Well, she didn't stay, but she left us alone. So I had a meeting, I think every day or twice a day, in the afternoon and then in the evening with the missionaries. And I was getting many, many great answers that I had as a child growing up, and I couldn't get any answers. Little simple childlike answers about why don't we have a prophet today? Why can't somebody perform miracles like the stories you hear as a child, the Bible stories and stuff, things that I'd heard. I couldn't get these answers from anybody. And suddenly these 2 guys, a little bit younger than me at the time, were telling me all these answers. And I was really eating it up, and it was everything that I had wanted. And it didn't take long until I got my challenge for baptism, and I accepted it. Now at this point, I believe I had seen Lorraine maybe 10 or 12 times, or 9 or 10 times. And we lived this distance apart. I knew in my heart she was the one that night she walked through the door. And she had never said to me anything about getting married or anything, or investigate the church. She just gave me that little question if I wanted to know more about it. But I was challenged for baptism, and I accepted the baptism date. And I was so excited, I had nobody to tell. So I called her. And in the phone call I said, I've had all the lessons, I know the church is true. I'm going to be baptized in December the 1st. I love you, let's get married. And she said, I'll call you back. Look, you're old enough, you go and pray about it, and the Lord will tell you if this is right for you. Anyway, she called me back, and we agreed to be married. The drummer in the Guess Who was getting married, And it was a chance for her to come to Winnipeg to meet my parents and things like that. And we went to Gary Peterson's wedding, which was in September, and then we set up our wedding date and my baptism date. So early in December I got baptized, and we all got in a Greyhound bus that had the Guess Who written on the side, and all drove to Regina for our wedding. We had our wedding there in the Regina Chapel. And after it was over, we came back and got a little house in Winnipeg, and I had to go back to work with the band, with the Guess Who. And things got very tough because I'd already said earlier, they were getting into this drug culture that was happening at the time. And I really felt in my heart they were making a mistake. And they saw me not joining in with them, and they really thought I was making a mistake. And our music was kind of going along as music goes along, and we've been together 8 years. So the music was really coming naturally. But I found myself growing apart from them and wanting to get away from them just because of the difference in our lifestyles. And to make matters worse, we had a hit record. It made matters better and worse. And it was called These Eyes, and Burton sang it. I wrote it with Burton, and we played on it together, and it sold 1 million copies. So suddenly we were a hit group. And then we had the other brother here's read off the songs, Laughing, Undone, No Time, American Woman, and a whole string of million-selling records, and then making awful lot of money on the road playing our concerts. Well, it was wonderful for a time to set aside our differences. So we just went together on the road, and for 10 years now being together, we were suddenly being paid. Because the first 8 or 9 years you don't get paid much. Whatever you get paid, you buy another guitar with. And suddenly, so we just went along like this, but we were always antagonizing each other. And I'd find that after our concert, I'd be alone in my motel room, either on the telephone long distance talking to my wife, or strumming away on my guitar, or reading my scriptures. And in the room next to me would be this circus going on. I like to call it auditions for Animal Kingdom. That's what it sounded like. I was the leader of the band, and I ran everything. And I'd be in my room and not able to sleep at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and knew that we had an airplane to catch the next morning at 7 or 8 o'clock, and there'd be this World's Fair going on next door. And I'd find myself going next door, knocking on the door and saying, Burton or Jim, whoever answers the door, can you guys keep it down? We're going to look terrible on stage tomorrow. Me too. I want to sleep, but can you keep it down? We've got to get up in 4 hours. But when I'd knock on the door to say that, after a couple of times, it would get pretty awkward. And a lot of times it was like I was a narc knocking on the door, because I'd knock and I'd hear things being flushed down the toilet, girls being lowered out the window, and stuff being hidden and stuff, and it was just really unpleasant. So instead of being kind of the leader of the band or the big brother, I was now the father or the grandfather. I was the authority, I was the law, if you want to call it, and it just got really bad. When you're together this length of time, 10 years, it's hard to sit down with a bunch of guys and say, I'm really neat, I'm doing terrific things, and you guys are a bunch of jerks. I'm going to leave. That's really hard to do, because they thought they were doing a neat thing, and they thought I was the jerk. So my wife and I began to pray about it and say, how can we get a nice, convenient, quick, business-like way for me to get out of the Guess Who? And I thought if I prayed about it really well, and I was living the principles, that a big hand would come out of a cloud and pick me up, put me down, safe and sound with my family, and out of the Guess Who. Well, it didn't happen that way. One night in the middle of about a 90-day tour, which is really tough to take because now we had a son. We'd been married in Tampa and had our first son, Talmadge. And I had something happen to me that I didn't know at the time what it was. I now know it was called the gallbladder attack. So that night I had this attack that lasted 2 or 3 hours. It was 2 or 3 hours of extreme pain and vomiting a lot of blood. To make matters worse, it happened every night for 2 weeks. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. The rest of the Guess Who didn't know what was wrong with me. And instead of this difference that we had of getting on each other's nerves and kind of making snide remarks to each other, them to me about being straight, and me to them about being blown, which is the word I use, they began to feel very sorry for me. And in the middle of the night when I'd have one of my attacks, they would take me in our station wagon or whatever we'd have rented to a hospital, and I couldn't get any treatment. This is at the high time of acid trips and everything in 1969, 1970. And I'd go in with this internal pain and cold and sweating and vomiting and stuff, and the doctor would say, just take this guy home, sit somebody with him in a bed, don't leave him alone in a room, and he'll come out of it. They thought I was on some, coming down from a drug or having a bad trip. And it was really tough, so we went from hospital to hospital to hospital and would get turned away every night. And finally I had to say to the band, look, I'm 22, I want to live to be 23. And I've got to go home to the doctor, my own family doctor, the doctor who delivered me into the world. I know he will know that I'm sick. Nobody else believed that I was sick, these other doctors. And in the middle of, suddenly, the Guess Who's earnings went from $800 a night to $10,000 a night. And in 1970, this was big money to make it every night for 90 days. So in the middle, I was sick, and I said, hey, I want to go home to my own doctor. And they said, well, how can we cancel this tour? Now, our last record, the last record I made with them, which was American Woman. At that time, the American Woman album was #1 in the world, and the American Woman single was #1 in the world. We were the #1 group in the world for 2 weeks. This is all we had ever dreamed about, little guys from Winnipeg. We had our gold records, and we were #1. And it was hard to leave that tour right in the middle with all this money in front of them. And one night we played in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and down right about there, standing in front of me, I was up on stage here, right in front of me was an 18-year-old boy named Bob Sabelico. And he was like me, and when I was growing up, I'd go to concerts and watch Chuck Berry on stage, or the Beatles, or Jerry and the Pacemakers, and people I grew up with, and I would dream that I was playing guitar, or I would dream that when the Beatles came to town, somebody would slam George Harrison's hand in the car door, and Paul McCartney would call me to play on the stage, because I knew all the Beatle tunes. Here was this young kid, and he watched everything I played, and he invited us to his house later. And we were invited to his house for one purpose, and it was for him to show his dad how good he could play guitar. And we were his favorite group. So we got to go to his basement, and I got to sit by myself in a chair while he played guitar and played all my parts with the Guess Who. We went home to our hotel room that night, and they had the worst attack of all, and I said, I've got to go home. And they said, we can't cancel our tour, just keep going. And I said, why don't I ask this guy Bobby to take my place? And they thought about it, and I said, because I can't go on, I'm going home. You either cancel the next 10 days and lose $100,000, or take Bobby and make it. So they said, we'll take Bobby and make it. So I called Bobby up the next morning, and I said, if you play 10 days, I'll pay you out of my pocket $10,000. You know all the songs. You can stand in the shadows. Burton will be out front. He'll be doing the tambourine and singing all the songs. We're only playing 40 minutes a night. You know all the songs. We'll play a long blues where you can play a lot of guitar. And then you could go home back to Westchester with some money in your pocket. You can help out your band, and I can go home and be taken care of. So he came right into the Guess Who, and I went home, which was a blessing in itself. He practiced with them that night in his father's basement, and the next day they arranged the show. He knew all the songs. So for him, this was his dream, like I had the dream of filling George Harrison's shoes. I went back home to Winnipeg and went to my family doctor, who sent me to a specialist. They gave me some Valium to drink and x-rayed my insides, and my insides looked terrible. Many things were white, you drink this stuff to illuminate you, but my gallbladder, which is right here in the V of your chest, was shriveled and dark, which meant it was diseased and had to come out, and there was all these little marble kind of things, and I had maybe 8 or 10 gallstones. And the doctor said, you really have a problem, you need a gallbladder operation, but there's no real problem now, all the hospital beds are full. This was back in Winnipeg. I'll put you on a diet where you won't have another attack. Don't eat sugar, don't eat fried foods and that kind of thing. And you'll be elective surgery. When a bed comes up, I'll call you. But you need this operation. And I checked around and I found out, boy, when you get a gallbladder operation, you are in bed 3 or 4 months and you get stitches from your ear to your toes. And I didn't want this. So I went to get a better opinion. I went to another specialist. Had the whole same set of x-rays. Had a dual set of x-rays that were identical. So the next time I saw the Guess Who again, I said, I need an operation. It wasn't my gallbladder. I'll be out of commission 3 or 4 months. So why don't I just stay out of commission, and why don't you guys go on without me? And they said, great. They wanted me gone just as much as I wanted gone. It was just two different type of people. So they got 2 guys to take my place, which made me happier. They got 2 guitar players. And they went on, still after being #1 with American Woman, and had made a great whole bunch of records. Had a lot of success with Share the Land and many other albums. And the news hit the newspaper that I had left the Guess Who. And the headlines came out and said, "Idiot leaves #1 band in the world." Because in Canada, nobody at that time had made a real big crash in the musical field. And they began to ask questions. Was I thrown out? Did I quit? Was I caught cheating? Did I catch them cheating? Was I a bad musician or were they bad musicians? And everybody was looking deeper. Now we had all these little conflicts, but they were never big enough for the break. But I had this medical reason that nobody wanted to believe. So the newspapers went on printing all these stories, many of them fabricated. And we found it so tough to keep on living in Winnipeg. Our phone would be ringing all night with girls crying, saying, "Why are you leaving? Why are you breaking up? I've got to talk to Burton. Burton doesn't live here." And our in-laws had moved to Saskatoon. And my wife went into the hospital, had our second child, a little girl, whose name was Keisha. And the day I was supposed to pick her up at the hospital to take her home, I picked her up at the hospital, we got on the airplane, and went right to Saskatoon. Things were that bad in Winnipeg with kids coming to our house, and newspaper and radio people coming to our house. So we went up to Saskatoon, and nobody knew who I was, and it was the middle of the summer, it was June or July, 1978, it was great. And I was waiting for my doctor to call me from Winnipeg. I'd given him my phone number in Saskatoon. He's going to call me and say, "We got you a bed, come back for your operation." So in trying to kill time there one night, I went to a drive-in movie with my brother-in-law, Mark. And we went to see Swiss Family Robinson, which is one of my favorite movies. And as it got to the really good part, after the shipwreck and they had built the house and the scene reopens and there's this tree with a 3-story house in it that's just unbelievable. And I was really into tree houses, and I was really trying to build a tree house for your kids or yourself, and you can see what a crew it took to put that one in for the Swiss Family. My brother-in-law elbowed me and handed me a glass. Said, "Have a drink," and I took a sip. I handed it back to him, and it was that sweet orange pop, orange crush that they make at drive-in movies. It's all that syrup and a little bit of soda water. And I took a sip, and as I handed it back to him, my little cement mixer started up in my chest. And here it was. It had been 2 weeks since I had a gallbladder attack. And I said, "Mark, you've got to take me home. I'm going to have an attack." And he said, "Can you wait till the end of the movie?" This is the beginning. And I said, "I'll try." So I took a deep breath and I put my finger there because I thought I could stop the pain, and waited. And I said, "If you don't take me home, you're not going to believe what happens in the front seat of your car." He took me home really quick. We got home and my attack had begun. And so my in-laws called their family doctor, and he came and gave me a shot of Demerol and something to stop me from throwing up. He said the next morning they'll take me into the Saskatoon General Hospital. They had, I believe, 2 full floors of the Saskatoon General Hospital were gallbladder. They were the world's capital of gallbladder at that time. So he said, "You're really in luck. This is the place. We'll take you in the next morning. We'll call your doctors in Winnipeg. We'll get your x-rays and you'll have your operation. Instead of waiting for a bed there, you don't want to keep having attacks like this." So I said, "Okay." And before I passed out from the painkiller he gave me, I was administered to by my brother-in-law, who was just getting ready to leave for a mission in France, and my father-in-law. And they gave me a blessing, and at the end of the blessing they said, "Listen to the doctor, and everything will be all right." So I went to the hospital the next morning. I was all set to listen to the doctor and have it come out. The doctor came to me and said, and he was a specialist, "I just don't want to cut you open because you say you're sick. We've tried to call your doctors in Winnipeg, and this was a long weekend, and they're all on the golf course. So it'll take us a few days to get your x-rays sent here on the airplane from Winnipeg to Saskatoon. But I'll just take my own x-rays." He knew I hadn't eaten all night, I'd been unconscious. So I drank the barium, and they took a set of x-rays that morning. He came into my room that day, which was a Saturday at noon, with a set of x-rays, and he was shaking his head. And he said, "Mr. Bachman, something terribly is wrong with these x-rays." And I said, "What is it?" I thought something worse had happened inside. He said, "I don't want to tell you because we might have got them mixed up. So we'll just keep you in. You can just hang in there and stay in your bed. We'll take another set of x-rays tomorrow, and we'll have a double check when your name goes with the number of the x-rays." So next day, the same thing. Sunday at noon, he came in with my 2 sets of x-rays. Meanwhile, they had gotten my doctors in Winnipeg, and my doctors in Winnipeg had sent my x-rays on the airplane in a little medical pouch. And as the doctor walked into the room about Sunday noon with 2 sets of x-rays, still shaking his head, He said, I know now these are your x-rays, but they show that you're perfect inside. And he showed them to me. By then I could really read x-rays. And I looked, and there in the middle was this beautiful white gallbladder, no gallstones, nothing. And the nurse came in with the medical pouch, and she had the 2 sets of bad x-rays from 3 weeks before in Winnipeg. And he said, well, I can't understand this, but he said 1 in 3 million, which are the odds, pass gallstones right out of your body, because they're up so high, they're bound to get lodged somewhere else in your system. So we'll keep you in the hospital. So they kept me in the hospital. And they x-rayed my kidneys and my intestines and everything. And by the end of about a week, 4 or 5 days later, he came in and he said, there's nothing wrong with you. It's ridiculous you being in here. You might as well go home. And I don't know what happened. And I said, I'll tell you what happened. And I said, I was given a blessing and I was healed through faith, power of the priesthood. And he said, I know you're Mormon, because he knew my in-laws. And he said, you know, that's happened a couple of times in my career with Mormon people. It's happened to my colleagues. I've heard them talk about it. And it's wonderful that it happened to you. It's a real blessing. But don't talk too much about it, because there's no chapter on this in any medical book. I said, okay, Dr. Brand, I'm going home, and I only talk about it to people who will understand. And that's what I'm doing. So I went back to my in-laws' place in Saskatoon. It was still a beautiful summer, and the week after, I was sitting around with Lorraine and our 2 kids, and she said to me, do you realize what has happened? We prayed for a way for you to get out of the Guess Who nice and neat and clean. And you're out. There was no lawyers, there was no accountants, there was no lawsuits, there was no bad meetings. And the day that I went to them and said, I need an operation, and 3 months in the hospital, 3 months recuperation, we drew up a little agreement that we all signed on our letterhead, where they agreed to give me 25% of my royalties, and I agreed to give them the name The Guess Who, which I had copywritten as leader of the band. The leader of the band usually copyright the name with the Musicians Union and with Washington, D.C. I gave them the name, the right to use the name The Guess Who, just for my share of the royalties. And that was all a little piece of paper, and it was legal, and it was all done with very good feelings. So here I was, a short time later, out of the Guess Who, after having received a wonderful blessing from the Lord, being healed through faith. And one wonderful thing about the whole experience is the human mind does not retain pain. So I could not recall any of the pain that I had gone through for those couple of weeks. And all I had was this wonderful feeling of being blessed. And we were free to start a whole new phase of our life. And the Guess Who had rocked on, like I said, on the charts, and thought I was getting my share of the money that I had worked so hard for. So here was this wonderful blessing and an answer to our prayers. Well, as I told you before, I had a love for music, an emotional outlet. And now that I was healthy again, I was pretty bored. I would be up at 2 or 3 in the morning mowing the lawn, practicing my guitar. I had all this adrenaline in my system. And finally my wife said, look, whatever you got to do to get happy again, if it means starting another band, just go and do it, because if you're happy, I'll be happy, and the kids will be happy. So I started another band. And so the situation wouldn't get out of hand like it did in the Guess Who. I went to people I could control, and I went to my younger brothers. I was the oldest. So I went to my younger brothers and an old friend of mine, Freddie Turner, who at that point had been a friend for about 16 years. And now it's going on 20 years. So I went to Freddie Turner and my brother Robbie and my other brother Tim, and we started a little band. And we were looking for a name, and we wanted a really good name that would just knock people out and that they would remember. And we first had a name called Brave Belt, which didn't mean anything. We had 2 albums under the name Brave Belt. We kind of did country rock music. They were complete failures, but it was a chance for us to get to know each other as individuals and as a band, and a chance for me to set down the ground rules of what I wanted in my new band. I wanted no drinking, no smoking, no dope, nothing like this. You guys hang in there. I know all the right people. I know how to write hits. I know how to produce hits, because I had done it. I had a track record, and they didn't. You listen to me, and if we're lucky, we'll make the charts, and we'll make some money. And that's what they all wanted. They were all musicians who had the same dream that I had. So we all started out with those basic rules. And along the way, we changed our name. There was three Bachmans. We put Bachman, we put down Turner, and we needed something to go with it, because we didn't want people to think we were like Steels and Cross, because we were playing much heavier music. And we went to a truck stop late one night. We were eating greasy hamburgers, and as we went to pay at the cash register, there was a trucker's magazine called Overdrive. And I said to Fred Turner, that would be a good name for an album. it's really a strong, powerful name. He said, how about Bachman Turner Overdrive? I said, wow, and I took a napkin and I wrote it down. And as I wrote it down, I wrote it one under the other because the name was so long, how narrow a napkin is. I was writing across the napkin. I wrote them down under each other, Bachman Turner Overdrive, and we saw the BTO. I said, wow, that's neat. Kids can say BTO. Suddenly we were planning the kids to chant our name. And at this time, I had financed the band out of my own pocket, out of the money I had made in the Guess Who, which was my retirement money. I was 26, so I wasn't working, and I had money, so I was retired. This was to pay for our house, our mortgage, the cornflakes, the car, and I had taken this money and put very close to $100,000 of my own money into the band. I wanted them there and available in case we had the lucky break that I knew could be on the horizon. I was doing a lot of praying and asking the Lord for guidance, and how can I make it in this business? Can I make it in this business? After the whole split up with the Guess Who, I ran into Bert Cummings and Jim Cale on the airplane once, and they were in a bad state, having been taking some drugs and drinking on the airplane. And it was kind of a verbal skirmish on the airplane. And they called me a couple of names, and the last thing they said as I got off the airplane and walked through the Mounties were waiting for them. The pilot had called ahead and said, there's guys going berserk on the plane. The Mounties were waiting in Winnipeg, but I walked through the Mounties waiting for them. They yelled, you're nuts, you'll never make it being straight. You're a freak in this business. So that was always on my mind. Now I was $98,000 in the hole, supporting my brother Robbie, my brother Tim, and Fred Turner. And I had cut an album that had cost us in around $40,000. First BTO album. And I had taken it to 26 record labels. They all said, it's kind of neat, but we don't want to buy it. So you go back and look at your record collection and try to find 26 record labels. You really know I was searching. I got refused by the biggies, by Columbia, CBS, Epic, A&M, Elektra, Atlantic, everybody. And I was down to Ralph's Records. I had all these letters of refusal from these 26 record labels. And I was getting pretty down at the time, and I was all set to say, well, my limit's going to be $100,000. I know I can write it off on my taxes. I would have welcomed having it back, but I knew I could have written it off as a business deduction. And I will make my ceiling $100,000, and I'll pack it in, and I'll get a normal job. And at this time, while I was weighing this decision and praying over it, the band was very down in the dumps. We had a stack of refusals, and I was close to $100,000 in my pocket. Now, nobody would book us in Canada. We had quite a bad reputation because all this stuff had happened in the press after I had left the Guess Who. And I got a phone call from New York City one day, and he said, hi, this is Jerry, your old buddy, Jerry. Have I got a deal for you? You write me a commercial, a 30-second commercial. I will pay you $30,000. Now, when you've written hit songs, a 3-minute hit song, a commercial is kind of easy. It's 1/10 of the hit song. You write a 30-second thing or a 60-second commercial. I said, wow, that'll really help my bank account. What's it for? And he said, Schlitz beer. And like a fool, I put the phone on my shoulder and I went to my wife Lorraine and I said, what should I do? And she said, you know what to do. That's all I knew what to do. And I went back on the phone and I said, Jerry, if you can get me 7-Up, Prescott, potato chips, I'll do anything. But I won't write a commercial for beer or for cigarettes, because I don't believe in doing it. You know I don't. So why should I write some neat little hip song to make somebody else drink or smoke? And he said, okay, I understand, and hung up, and I never heard from him again. 2 days later, I got another phone call, another associate in New York, the same deal, to write a commercial. And I think it was for $15,000 or $20,000, and it was for Coca-Cola. And I said the same thing to the guy, you know, I don't believe in a specific thing that's called caffeine. It's in Coca-Cola, it's in coffee, and I just don't want to sing things go better with it. And make somebody drink it, because, you know, I stay away from it myself. The next day, another phone call came from Chicago. A voice said, hi, this is Charlie, and in the background I could hear, give me your money, please. The first song on our BTO album, the first album. And he said, I love this tape. hold all your other offers. We want to make a deal. Charlie, you got my word. I'll hold So he said, how much have you got in the album? And I said, I've got $98,000. And he said, well, we'll send you 40 right away to help get some stuff. We'll make you a deal on the album. And it was really funny. That was another blessing and answer to prayer. That particular record company, Mercury Records, had already passed on our album. And the guy who had passed is a polite word for no in the record industry. You get a letter saying, we enjoyed listening to your tape, but we passed. And somebody had passed, and Charlie was in cleaning out his office. And he picked up the little white box of tape, little demo tape, and my name caught his eye because he knew of my track record in the Guess Who. And there was a big thing stamped on it, rejected. And it made him play it. And when he played it, he was just playing it and called me in the middle of that first song. So something made him go and play that tape. That they had already passed on it. He said, boy, this is what we want. We just lost Rod Stewart. We just lost Uriah Heep, who were two big groups on Mercury. And you're going to be our next big rock group. Come on to New York, we'll send you some tickets. So I went to Chicago, New York, and met everybody and tried to keep it rolling. The first BTO album came out, and we went on the road and played for everybody. And the album came on the charts. And it stayed on the charts for a year, and that was really good. That was more than I hoped for. And it sold between 600,000 and 700,000 copies. And that was wonderful. We had a gold album. And I got a phone call from Charlie saying, we don't want to wait a year and a half for your next album, because when you get a record deal, you give them an album every year, a year and a half. 4 months after the first album had come out, Charlie was on the phone again and said, we want another album. So we cut our second BTO album. When it came out, I had begun to sing, because Fred Turner was losing his voice and couldn't sing all night, and me just being a guitar player was kind of forced to sing. And I sang a song called Taking Care of Business. And that song was a big hit. It was a top 5 record for us worldwide. We also did another song called Let It Ride in that album. That was top 10. And suddenly I had written, which is now people call a rock and roll classic. That's like Johnny B. Good or some of the songs guys play for encores that every band knows. And now Taking Care of Business is growing into that kind of song. I was just very excited. And we did another album, the Not Fragile album, and in there was a song called Rolling Down the Highway. And I got to sing again. And I stuttered my way through a song. I have my brother Gary who stutters, and I did it as a joke for him. And it was called You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet. And it wasn't even supposed to go on the album. It was a reject from the album, because it wasn't really gelling musically. It wasn't what we had wanted musically. And I figured, well, I'll stutter through this. Send it to my brother Gary, and it'll be us, his brothers, playing a song just for him. Nobody in the world will have this song. But the people at the record company heard it and put it on the album, so I buried it near the end of the album. And then it started to get airplay, more and more airplay, and I got a phone call saying, it's top 5 phone requests in Portland, it's top 5 in Denver, it's top 3 in Florida, it's at number New York and Chicago and everywhere. And not being a fool, I didn't say no for any more than about 2 weeks. I said, this can't be, it's a joke, this song can't be a record. Finally, after about 2 weeks and seeing that it was top phone request holder, I said, Charlie, take it and go. Just go crazy. So that song, Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, funny enough, we landed in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Same things keep happening to me. Same little airport, Westchester, Pennsylvania, that I had flown out of many years before to go home to get my gallbladder. And I called Charlie. Charlie, by the way, is Charlie Thatch, and he's the president of Mercury Records. And I called him, and when you're on the road, you don't get your mail, so I didn't know where we were every week in Billboard. So every Wednesday, I'd call Charlie, and he'd say, you're number 10, you're number 8, you're number 9 at the bullet. I called Charlie this particular Wednesday, and he said, you can turn around, go back into the restaurant, buy everybody a milkshake, you're number 1. Ain't Seen Nothing Yet is number 1 in Billboard. It's number 1 in Record Road, it's number 1 in Cashbox, and by the way, your album, Not Fragile, is number 1. We wouldn't have a milkshake. And I couldn't wait. We went into the hotel room and just jumped on the bed like kids. Screaming and this was unbelievable. And I called Lorraine and I said, we're number 1, we're number 1. And she said, wait a minute. You're number 1 and you're straight. And I had forgotten that unfortunate airport thing because I had gotten so involved in working and touring, I had forgotten that basic challenge that had gotten printed in a lot of newspaper articles. And now the newspaper articles were changing their mind, and the reporters who were slandering me really reported badly for 3 or 4 years were suddenly on the wagon saying, we knew this guy would make it, and he's straight, isn't it wonderful? That's really what happened. And meanwhile, the Guess Who, while we were really inching our way up the charts, because it was not easy, we had a great many blessings and a lot of luck. And I know the luck comes from the Lord, and you've got to be ready to take advantage of the circumstance. While we were climbing the charts, the Guess Who were sliding down the charts, and they were getting more and more into their, thing I had described earlier. And other members had come and gone and quit, and now the Guess Who was like a training ground for other musicians. Guys would quit and join every 6 or 10 months. One day, last December, I got a phone call. Now, I hadn't spoken or heard from Brigham Cummings for 7 years. There had been all these terrible stories in the press where I would go to a town and somebody would interview me just like they did half an hour ago and say, what do you think of the Guess Who? And I'd say, they're not doing too well, are they? I mean, it was obvious looking at the charts. And they would take that thing that I said and really expound on it. And then that article would get to Brigham Cummings. And the next time he did an interview, he said worse stuff about me, which they made even worse, and it just really snowballed. So I was in no particular need to talk to Bertie, or him to me. But I got a phone call in about November saying, do you know what Bertie has done? He's quit the Guess Who, he's left Winnipeg, he's moved to California, he signed with Portrait Records, he's got an album produced by Richard Perry, who's one of the big producers in the States. He does Carly Simon and people like that, and Leo Sayer. And he's put your song on the album. He ain't seen nothing yet. I couldn't speak. And I said, are you sure it's my song? Because a lot of times there's songs with the same title or one word or an apostrophe changed or an S added on it. They said, it is your song. And then I started to read articles where they were interviewing Bert and saying, why did you do this guy's song? You hate each other. You said this about him in the trades. You wouldn't go to his funeral, then, all this kind of stuff. And he said, well, I realized after I got out of the Guess Who environment, what a poor environment it was. And that a lot of things Randy had done and said were right, because now I have to do the same thing. Now that I'm looking out for myself. So, and I haven't spoken to Randy, and I don't know how to get a hold of him to bury the hatchet verbally, so I'm doing it musically. Then I hope we can speak. And I read this in Billboard and Rolling Stone, magazines like that. So I got a phone call in December, and it was the road manager of Brigham Cummings, who I'd been in touch with all that time since I left the Guess Who, because he bought my house around up Winnipeg. And whenever we'd go back to Winnipeg, we'd like to take our kids and show them their first bedroom and our real first house that we bought. So this guy named Jumbo called me up and he said, Bert is playing in Vancouver. He'd like you and Lorraine to come to his concert. And I thought about it, figured, what is he going to be like? All the press are going to be there. He now had a gold record to stand tall and his own solo album. He's big. And currently in BTO, I'm gearing down. The same kind of thing happened in BTO. As everybody made money, their egos got big and their heads got bigger, and they bring in their own rules. And my rules were being thrown away. So I was gradually planning to leave BTO. And, the same thing happens to me every 4 or 5 years. I believe it'll happen to you also in your life. You'll go through different groups of friends that you will grow into and then grow out of as you progress and live the way of the Lord and progress spiritually. You'll grow in and out of friends. You retain some really close friends. But as you know, when you join the church, before you get a whole new circle of friends, and as you come to school, you just get different kind of friends. I said, yeah, we'll go to the concert. So Lorraine and I went to the concert, and in the middle of the show, Burton stopped playing. Vancouver was always a big Guess Who town, and the place was sold out. It was at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, quite a big theater. And he stopped the show, and he said, all of you know this story that's been going on, and there's a guy out there that I haven't talked to for 7 years, and he's here with his wife tonight. And I would like to dedicate this next part of the show to them. And the crowd was they were as quiet as you are now. Really quiet. For a rock concert, that's really quiet. And he started to sing The Way We Were, Barbra Streisand. And there was blue lights on it. And he just did a few bars of The Way We Were, and then he went into the songs we had written together that had been hits. And he did the medley of These Eyes and Laughing and Undone and No Time in American Woman. When it was over, I was sitting there in tears. I believe Lorraine was in tears. The audience was on their chairs, screaming and clapping. It was really unbelievable. And after the concert, I went backstage. The first time I met him, we shook hands and hugged each other like long-lost friend. And I found instead of the Burton Cummings that had been very antagonistic toward me when I left the Guess Who, it was more like 17-year-old, I'll use the word in punk, the young kid, the upstart, that I invited into the Guess Who. He had changed. And I said to him, Burton, you're doing wonderful. How can you do any better? A gold record, a gold single, a gold album, a good band. You're just doing great. You're doing all the right things. What happened? And he said, I was on the road one morning and I woke up, still stoned, looked around my room and there was people laying all over my room in different states of consciousness and dress and that kind of thing. And I picked up the trade, I opened it up, and there at number 1, BTO. And I looked for me. This is Burton speaking. I looked for the Guess Who. We weren't on the charts. And I said, this guy must be doing something right. So I decided at that point that when I got over this little bit of the tour of the Guess Who, I would be leaving the band. I was going straight. And at the time he had 200 acid trips, and he would take anything anyone gave him or smoke anything that would light. And he was really in push, vocally, mentally, physically, and everything. But he went to LA and had a very good friend there who we grew up with, who's now the vice president of Portrait Records, who straightened out all his legal affairs and got him eating good food and got his drinking cut way down and got his smoking way down and cut him off drugs and got him out jogging and breathing air again. His voice just went zoom, his voice expanded. And to go from, These Eyes was one of the greatest things Burton Cummings ever sang, because any of you try to sing that song, the octave range on it is really enormous. He has a great voice. But since These Eyes, his range was getting shorter and shorter, until he could almost do one-note song. But on Stand Tall, his voice was back, and he's hitting the high, screaming notes, not screaming, but just beautiful, high, clear notes. And this is the result of it. And he said, I really sympathize with what you went to when you left this band. He said, because I looked around and I said, I don't want to end up like these guys. I'd rather end up like, and he used me as an example. And that really knocked me for a loop for him to say that, because he was the other end of the rope for me. And I'm only too grateful that one day, sitting in the coffee house, in the folk house, that I saw that girl, knew that she was the one, walked into her house, got that feeling, and I've tried to keep that feeling with me ever since. I didn't have to go through the things that Burton Cummings went through and almost not make it, like the Jim Morrisons and the Jimi Hendrixes and the Janis Joplin and the people who don't make it in this business. I'm just grateful that happened to me, and all the blessings that I have. I really know this gospel is true, and I've traveled all over the world. It's amazing to go to Sunday school in London, England, or in Tokyo, and it's the same thing at home. It's the same feeling, and no other church has this unified worldwide thing. I know we have a prophet. Hopefully I'm going to meet him tomorrow, and that's going to be a great experience. And it's great to be here. This ends, for me, a wonderful summer, because in all my travels with the Guess Who and BTO, kids in MIA, or young men's generals, would find out I was Mormon. And I would get asked to speak at youth conferences and firesides. And I could very rarely do them because I was doing one-nighters every night in a different city. And when this summer came, when I was gearing down BTO to prepare to do something else, to a couple of situations that happened in the church, I was drawn through prayer. I asked the Lord, what shall I do this summer? I was drawn to a little drawer in my roll-top desk. I opened that drawer, and in there was letters, some of them 5 and 6 years old, inviting me to come speak. So I got on the phone, called Mission and Stake and Branch President. And I called about 3 to see how it would happen. And it's tough to call a mission president and explain who I am. I would call and ask to speak to a missionary who should know. And I was really blessed, because I'd call and the voice would say, hello, this is Elder, Smith. And I'd say, Elder, this is Randy Bachman. He'd say, really? So I knew that I'd be doing a fireside there. I knew that he could go and explain to the branch president or mission president who I was and then what I was doing. instead of me trying to do it and the guy just getting a story out of the blue. So I made 3 of those phone calls, and then, as is true tradition in this church, the grapevine carried it on to where I did in excess of 20 firesides across Canada, from Halifax, which is the furthermost eastern part of Canada, right to Victoria and everywhere in between, and had many crowds like this tonight, and it was just a real blessing, and it was like my own little mission, because I joined the church too late to go on a mission, and I was very blessed that I could go this summer. I could afford to do it out of my own pocket, and I was lucky enough that the kids still knew who I was to come out and hear me talk. And a lot of those letters got back to Salt Lake City, and some of the kids that I spoke came here to BYU. And then I got invited here today, and it's wonderful to be here. I just feel great. And that basically is my testimony. I have another story that I'll tell you at the end, but that's my testimony, my story, how I rock is my life and the church is my life. That's my story, and I leave it to you in the name of Jesus Christ.